you ever have with someone happens after you've stopped talking to them forever? It's a strange thought, isn't it? A conversation implies an exchange, a presence. But in the landscape of the human psyche, presence is a far more mysterious thing than physical proximity. The real dialogues, the ones that shape us, often take place in the resonant silence left behind, long after a door has clicked shut for the final time. Our culture is built around a single narrative of departure, the pain of being left. It is the great lament of our songs, the central wound in our stories. We focus on the one who was abandoned, whose heart was broken. And this is a real and valid pain. Yet we so rarely turn our gaze to the other side of that closed door, to the silent, seismic event that unfolds in the inner world of the person who is left behind. We seldom ask what happens to the architecture of their soul when a supporting pillar is suddenly removed. We are conditioned to believe that our absence creates a simple void, a hollow space of longing and emptiness. But the masters of depth psychology, from Jung to Hillman, teach us that the psyche abhors a true vacuum. It doesn't just leave a hole. Instead, your departure hangs something in that empty space. It hangs a mirror. And this isn't an ordinary mirror that reflects what is plainly visible. It is a psychic mirror, forged in the fires of absence. It doesn't show them their own reflection as they see it every day. It reflects back everything they unknowingly projected onto you. Their hopes, their unlived potential, their deepest insecurities, and the disowned parts of their own soul, their shadow. For the first time, perhaps in their entire life, they are forced into an intimate confrontation not with your absence, but with the full, unvarnished, and often terrifying presence of themselves. What they see in that mirror, the raw material of their own being that you were once holding for them, will set them on one of two paths. It will become the catalyst for a profound journey of integration that could save them, or it will trigger a psychological shattering, a descent into the very chaos they sought to avoid. This is not just a story of heartbreak. It is the story of a soul at a crossroads. Hello, fellow thinkers. Have you ever considered that every relationship is, in a sense, a shared reality? We build it together, brick by brick, with shared memories, private jokes, and future promises. It becomes a foundational piece of our identity, a part of the very architecture of our psyche. So, what happens when one person walks away, taking their half of that reality with them? Today, we are exploring the unspoken psychology of walking away. I want to be very clear, this is not an analysis of cruelty, nor a guide to ghosting or revenge. This is an exploration of what happens when one soul makes a choice for its own survival, and in doing so, becomes an unwilling catalyst for transformation in another. It's about the deep, structural shift that occurs in the human psyche when a pillar of its reality is suddenly, irrevocably, gone. Every day, this quiet demolition happens thousands of times. It announces itself in the cold blue light of a text message, in the deafening silence of a packed suitcase left in the hall, or in the strained politeness of a final, mutual agreement. On the surface, these are just events, sad, perhaps, but finite. Yet, underneath that surface, a profound and perilous inner journey begins for the person left behind. It's a journey so archetypally human, so predictably patterned, that the great psychoanalyst Carl Jung was able to chart its territories decades ago. He acted as a cartographer for the soul, drawing a map of the difficult terrain one must cross after being left. To navigate this map, we need a guide. So we will follow the story of a specific psychological type, an archetype we will call the performer. The performer is the part in all of us whose sense of self-worth is deeply entangled with the role they play for others. Their identity is fused with their social mask, what Jung called the persona. For them, being a good partner or a cherished friend isn't just a behavior, it is the very core of their perceived value. We will watch as the performer, having just been left, steps into the crucible of absence. We will witness how the loss of their audience triggers a desperate and revealing series of psychological maneuvers. Their story will be our lens, helping us understand the immense, often hidden, transformation that your absence creates. Let's begin. How does a psyche defend itself against a truth it cannot yet bear? It doesn't grieve, it gets busy. In the first days and weeks following your departure, our performer is unlikely to feel the deep, resonant ache of loss. Instead, they feel a profound and piercing sense of insult. This isn't just sadness, it is a fundamental wound to the ego. Their carefully constructed reality, the narrative in which they were an essential, valued character, has been invalidated. And the ego, in its primary role as the guardian of our self-concept, cannot process this contradiction. This is the first defense mechanism kicking in, what Jungian psychology calls the disbelief phase. It is a potent form of psychological anesthesia. And so, the performance begins. To avoid the internal chaos of cognitive dissonance, that unbearable static between what they believed and what has just happened, they pour all their energy outwards. They become a curator of a new, spectacular life. Their social media, once quiet, erupts into a highlight reel of forced joy, dazzling nights out, spontaneous trips, and captions shouting about freedom and new beginnings. This isn't healing, it is performative wellness. Often, this performance requires a co-star. They may quickly enter a new, intense, rebound relationship. To the outside world, it looks like they've moved on with astonishing speed. But from a depth perspective, this new person is not seen for who they are. They are a psychological stand-in, an understudy cast in the role you just vacated. This isn't about connection, it's about proving a desperate thesis to themselves and to the world. My life, my happiness, my worth were never dependent on the person who left. See, the show goes on, and you were never essential to it. You were replaceable. But if life is truly so wonderful, if the script is so improved, why do these strange, unconscious behaviors begin to surface? Why do they accidentally drive past your old apartment, a subconscious pilgrimage to the scene of the crime? Why do they check, with a compulsive flicker of the thumb, to see if you've watched their triumphant online stories? These are the tells, the modern-day Freudian slips. They are cracks in the mask, revealing that the conscious mind is performing a play of indifference while the unconscious, where the real grief is stored, is still reaching for a connection. This is because the performance is deeply, profoundly exhausting. It takes an immense amount of psychic energy to hold up a false self. And beneath the brightly lit stage of their new life, the floorboards are beginning to groan under the strain. The truth of the loss, which has been suppressed, is beginning to gather weight, preparing to break through. The performance, by its nature, requires an audience. When the audience leaves and the applause fades, what is left? Only the actor, alone on a dark stage, and the crushing weight of the silence. The frantic energy of the first phase cannot be sustained. It is a psychological sprint, and eventually, the psyche collapses from exhaustion. This is the moment the dam of denial, so carefully constructed, begins to fracture under the immense pressure of unfelt grief. This is when the emotional eruption begins. And it is almost always messy. What comes flooding through those fractures is everything the performance was designed to hold back. Carl Jung would identify this eruption as a raw, undiluted encounter with the shadow. The shadow, in Jungian terms, is not a source of evil. It is simply the unconscious repository for all the parts of ourselves we have disowned. Aspects of our personality we deem too needy, too angry, too vulnerable, or too powerless to be acceptable to ourselves and others. During the relationship, the performer likely repressed these traits to maintain their persona as the ideal partner. Your presence kept the shadow contained. Your absence removes the container. Suddenly, the carefully curated mask shatters. The eruption is often volatile and contradictory. It can manifest as a late-night wall of text messages that swing wildly from desperate pleas of "I miss you" to streams of vitriolic rage, to accusations of cruelty. This isn't a logical progression, it's emotional flooding. It's the psychic equivalent of a drowning person thrashing in the water, grabbing onto anything. The dependency they denied now clings. The anger they suppressed now burns. The vulnerability they hid is now a gaping, open wound. But we must look deeper at the rage. On the surface, it's directed at you for leaving. But the true, unconscious source of this fury is often something else entirely. It isn't just, "you hurt me." It is a primal scream of, How dare you, by leaving, reveal to me that I was vulnerable enough to be hurt? It's a rage born from the profound shame of having their own powerlessness reflected back at them. They are not just angry at you for closing the door. They are furious that you were the one who held the key. This phase is agonizing, for both the one experiencing it and for anyone who witnesses it. It feels like a chaotic collapse, a step backward into pure destruction. But from a psychological standpoint, it is the first truly honest moment in this entire journey. The performance was a lie, however beautiful. This eruption, in all its messy, painful, and unfiltered glory, is the truth. And in the world of the psyche, you cannot begin to heal what you have not yet been brave enough to feel. After the raw tempest of the emotional eruption, a new state settles in: exhaustion. The psyche, having spent all its energy on rage and despair, now craves one thing above all else: shelter. The human mind cannot live in chaos for long. It has a fundamental, desperate need for meaning. To escape the torment of meaninglessness, it must create a story. It must weave the raw, painful events into a coherent narrative. This is the meaning-making phase, and it is perhaps the most critical crossroads in this entire psychological journey, for the story our performer chooses to tell themselves now will determine the entire trajectory of their future. At this crossroads, two distinct paths emerge. The first is a well-trodden, deceptively easy path. It is the villain narrative. Here, the mind, in a final act of ego preservation, rewrites history. Your flaws are magnified into pathologies. Your normal human mistakes are reframed as calculated acts of malice. They become the noble victim, and you become the comprehensive explanation for all their pain. This narrative is psychologically seductive because it offers immediate relief. It absolves them of all responsibility and restores a sense of righteous order. In Jungian terms, this is a massive act of projection, where all the unwanted, negative aspects of the relationship dynamic are cast onto you, the departing figure. This story protects the ego, but it is a gilded cage. It traps them in bitterness, ensuring they learn nothing, and programs them to repeat the same patterns, forever on the lookout for the next villain. The second path is terrifyingly harder. It is narrow, uphill, and poorly lit. It is the path of the accountability narrative. It does not begin with an accusation, but with a quiet, devastatingly courageous question: what was my part in this? This is crucially different from self-blame, which is just another ego trick. It is not about declaring oneself worthless, but about engaging in a radical act of self-recognition. It is the willingness to examine their own patterns, their own fears, their own contributions to the dynamic that made your departure inevitable. It's the moment they stop looking at what you did to them and start looking at what your relationship revealed in them. The story they choose now, whether consciously or not, becomes the psychological lens through which they will view themselves and all future relationships. One narrative leads back into a cycle of pain and resentment. The other is the first step out of the loop and towards authentic growth. The story they build from these ruins will either be their prison or the foundation for a stronger self. Everything that comes next hinges on this choice. And so, we arrive at the heart of the matter. This brings us back to the mirror hanging in the silent room of the psyche. For weeks, perhaps months, our performer has done everything possible to avoid truly looking at it. They have raged at the reflection, trying to shatter it with blame. They have tried to replace it with a new, more flattering one. They have tried to convince themselves it was distorted, a funhouse mirror that showed a twisted version of reality. But every defense requires energy, and now the energy is gone. In the quiet humility of utter exhaustion, they finally just look. In that moment of surrender, a profound shift happens. The image in the mirror ceases to be about you. They are no longer looking at the villain who wronged them or the savior they lost. The external figure dissolves, and for the first time, they see only themselves. They see a person stripped bare of the relational identity that had served as their psychological armor. They see the raw, trembling truth of their own inner landscape, their chronic, aching need for external validation, their deep, primordial fear of being alone, the unmistakable, repeating patterns of behavior that have followed them from one relationship to the next. They are not seeing your ghost. They are seeing the architecture of their own soul. This piercing moment of self-recognition is the very heart of what Carl Jung called individuation. He described it as the lifelong, often arduous, process of becoming a psychologically whole and integrated self, of differentiating from the collective and daring to become who we truly are. And here lies the devastating truth that is so often missed. Sometimes, a relationship, even a good and loving one, can become a beautiful, comfortable, and sacred place to hide from that journey. It allows two people to remain as two halves, leaning on each other so that neither ever has to learn to stand completely on their own. From this perspective, your departure did not ruin their life. It simply removed their primary hiding place. It was a severe mercy, an involuntary invitation to grow up, to finally answer the call of their own becoming. Whether they accept that invitation and embark on the difficult path of integrating these newfound truths is, and always will be, their choice. But the invitation itself, the opportunity to finally see themselves clearly, may have been the most significant and transformative gift that your absence could ever offer. So, we see that the journey through the landscape of loss is never truly about getting over the person who left. That frame is too small for the magnitude of the event. It is, and always has been, about integrating the lessons of their absence. It is a sacred, often painful, pilgrimage from the frantic performance on the sunlit stage, through the chaotic storm of the emotional underworld, and finally, into the quiet, humbling stillness of the moment you stand before the mirror and do not flinch. It is the path of learning to be with the one person you can never leave, yourself. An ending, by its very nature, feels like a finality, a death. But in the symbolic language of the psyche, an ending is often the prerequisite for a new beginning. A beginning that is almost always brutal, because it is born from the shattering of a world that felt safe. A beginning that is often necessary, because without the collapse of the old structure, the new, more authentic self cannot emerge. And finally, in the deepest sense, a beginning that can be seen as compassionate. Not in the act of leaving itself, which is fraught with its own pain, but in the profound, impersonal compassion of life itself, which will sometimes orchestrate a crisis in order to force a soul toward its own evolution. It is the harsh grace that removes a crutch so that we may finally learn the strength of our own legs. And so, I will leave you with a question, not for easy answers, but for quiet reflection. Think about a door you once had to close, or one that was closed for you. Set aside the anger, the blame, and the longing for just a moment. And ask yourself, what do you truly hope the person on the other side of that door eventually saw when they were finally alone with the mirror you left behind? And perhaps more importantly, what did that entire experience, in the end, reveal to you about what you see in your own? Thank you for joining me on this introspective journey. These explorations into the deeper currents of our lives are not always easy, but they are essential. In a world that so often prizes simple answers and quick fixes, taking the time to honor the complexity of the human heart is a quiet act of rebellion. If this discussion offered you a new lens, a moment of clarity, or simply a feeling of being understood, then I would be grateful if you'd express that by clicking the like button. It's more than just a metric. It's a signal to this platform and to our small community that there is a genuine hunger for conversations that go beyond the surface. It affirms that these deep dives into the architecture of the soul are necessary and valued. And now, I truly want to hear from you, because the final layer of understanding always comes from shared human experience. The question I left you with was a personal one, and I invite you, if you feel comfortable, to share a piece of your own story in the comments below. Tell us about a mirror moment in your own life, a time when an ending, however painful, forced a powerful and perhaps unexpected self-realization. You don't need to share every detail, only what feels true and right for you. Think of our comment section not as a forum for debate, but as a kind of digital campfire where we can share stories and bear witness to one another's journeys. Every story of insight and integration shared here becomes a source of light for someone else who might be navigating their own darkness. Your experience is a valuable part of this collective exploration into what it means to be human. If you wish to continue having these conversations with us, please consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss our next deep dive. We will continue to explore the map of the inner world together. Until then, my sincere wish for you is twofold. Be well, which means be patient, be gentle, and be compassionate with yourself as you navigate your own journey. And think deeply, which is an invitation to remain curious, to question your own narratives, and to never lose your sense of wonder for the profound mystery of your own mind. Thank you for your time and your attention.